Today we're looking at the latest NHL trade rumors from around the NHL. We've got the latest talk around the Calgary Flames, the Philadelphia Flyers, and a crazy trade proposal involving the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Minnesota Wild. Plus, we have the Stanley Cup Final set now with Vegas defeating the Dallas Stars last night. So we're going to discuss that, as well as some coaching vacancies being filled around the NHL and the latest around the ones that still remain unfilled. We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today. Let's get started by taking a look at the Stanley Cup Final, which is now finally set. Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final will begin on Saturday. So we've got 4 days of no NHL hockey. For those of you that are still looking for some good hockey action, I will encourage you to watch the Memorial Cup, which is obviously the Canadian Junior Hockey League's National Championship tournament taking place in BC right now. There's still some good games going on there if you really need to watch some hockey. But Vegas took care of business last night in Game 6, winning 6-0 against the Dallas Stars. They came out with a vengeance last night, absolutely dominated the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars did not look great at all. Jamie Benn returns after his 2-game suspension. I know a lot of media were saying they expected Jamie Benn to come out and have a phenomenal game, and hopefully he can keep his emotions in check and just play a real solid, hard game and be a good factor until the Dallas Stars hopefully pushing things to Game 7. And Jamie Benn didn't really do anything last night, to be completely honest. His ice time was low. He was one of the bottom 3 forwards on the team, playing just over 12 minutes, closer to 12 and a half minutes. He had 1 shot on net. He was only 25% on the face-off draws, which I know he didn't take a ton of draws, but still 25% is not great. 1 shot, 12 minutes. Didn't really do much, to be completely honest. Dallas played a lot better when he wasn't in the lineup, but I knew there was no chance they were not going to reinsert their captain into the lineup. As head coach Peter DeBoer said that they played so many elimination games throughout this series in the playoffs that he feels that it's kind of ran out of gas, and that very well does make sense. It could very well be the case. Jay Cottinger has been, inconsistent. It was been up and down. A really good game followed up by a not so good game, and he put together a couple of really good ones, and I imagine the young man's getting tired. Either way, Vegas, it was a dominant victory. Of course, they chose not to touch the Clarence Campbell Bowl trophy. It was the opposite. We saw the Florida Panthers grab their Prince of Wales trophy and celebrate. Completely different approaches there. So we have the Vegas Golden Knights will do battle with the Florida Panthers. Of course, these two teams should be able to put on some good, entertaining hockey for us. Of course, this is going to be a very interesting matchup. You get Sergei Bobrovsky between the pipes against Adin Hill, which is certainly not the goaltending matchup I think anybody would have predicted at the beginning of the playoffs or beginning of the regular season. But you got Mark Stone, Matthew Tkachuk, Barkov, Eichel, Pietrangelo, Montour, some good names here, having some real good action here in the playoffs. So should be fun. I will do a more official breakdown and prediction type video sometime this week after I've had a chance to kind of analyze how these teams match up and put out my thoughts and preview and prediction here before the finals get started. Of course, we did have some news in the coaching world today. Of course, there is a video on the channel if you want a more dedicated, detailed analysis of those moves. But just to quickly recap what happened, the Washington Capitals announced today that they have their new head coach in Spencer Carbery. Of course, most recently assistant coach with the Maple Leafs for the past couple of years, but had worked for a long time in the Capitals organization in the past, including a 3-year stint as head coach at AHL Hershey. And prior to that, of course, I'm pretty sure there was a break in between. He had worked for 5 or 6 years with their East Coast affiliate in South Carolina Stingrays. So he's well known in the Capitals organization, is now going to be working with them at the highest level after working with them at their 2 lower level minor league system. And obviously was a well-respected, highly sought-after coach. I believe he's going to be the youngest head coach down in the NHL. He's 41 years old. Retired from playing at a young age and went straight into coaching at the East Coast League level and kind of has worked his way up. Said he's also been a head coach at the OHL for a year in Saginaw. He's got American Hockey League assistant coach, American Hockey League head coach, NHL assistant coach, now NHL head coach. And like I said, he was responsible for the Leafs power play the last couple of years and really helped them really add a whole new dynamic to their power play and made it one of the top 2 power plays in the NHL over the last 2 seasons. He's largely responsible for that. So I think he's more than ready when you get a guy like Ovechkin, who's arguably the greatest power play player of all time. He should be able to hopefully do wonders and make that power play more lethal than it's been recently. So we'll see how things work out. We also saw news out of Nashville where they dismissed John Hines. He's no longer the head coach there. He's got 1 year left on his contract and has been given consent to seek other employment opportunities. And they've hired Andrew Brunette, of course, very familiar to the organization, and Barry Trotz. Barry Trotz was the first ever Predators coach, was there for a long stretch. Andrew Brunette was on the original Predators team, scored the very first goal in franchise history. So well known to Barry Trotz, well known to longtime Predators fans. So a couple of originals coming back, trying to right the ship and get this Nashville team back onto a new level as they missed the playoffs this year, and trying to kind of retool here on the fly and get back on track. It'll be interesting to see how things go for them. We know Brunette's a very offensive-minded coach, so it should bring a whole new style and some different things to see in Nashville here over the next couple of years. It'll be interesting to see how everything works out. And in Calgary, we don't have any word on who the head coach was, but there was news that they have reached out to former Rangers bench boss Gerard Gallant. This is to kind of gauge his interest to see if he'd like to be interviewed and be in the mix. And apparently he did express interest that he would like to be considered. So he was going to be interviewing. Of course, with the Flames, we know they have several internal candidates, including Mitch Love, Ryan Huska, Kirk Muller. Externally, not only are they looking at Gallant, they did briefly talk to Peter Laviolette, but that didn't go too far. They're also considering Mark Savard, longtime NHL player, current head coach of the OHL's Windsor Spitfires, and of course former NHLer Alex Tanguay, who's also quite well known and good friends with Craig Conroy and Jerome McGinley. So a number of interesting names. There's probably a few others out there too that hasn't been mentioned in the mix as well. And we also saw a change in Minnesota, and not in the head coaching position, but in the assistant coach world. Minnesota Wild assistant coach Brett McLean is going to be leaving the bench at the NHL level, going down to AHL to the Iowa Wild to become their new head coach. So there will be a vacancy and an opening on the Wild's bench at the NHL level. Of course, the Maple Leafs are going to be looking now to fill the void left by Spencer Carbery at the NHL level as well. I suspect that might not happen immediately. We need a new GM in Toronto first. And then, of course, they'll have to make a decision on Sheldon Keefe and the remaining coaching staff. And then once they do that, then they can kind of decide what to do. Because if they're going in a new direction, then they'll work with the new head coach on who their assistants are going to be. And if they keep Sheldon Keefe on, then they'll have to figure that out together. So we'll have to see where things go. When it comes to the Leafs GM, though, we know that it's been about 10 days now since Dubas has been gone from the team. Things seem to be ramping up as far as interviews and all these things for the Leafs to make a determination who their next guy is going to be in this role. Yes, and insider trading, they did confirm today that Marc Bergevin, a longtime Habs general manager, was indeed interviewed, and it was a long, lengthy conversation via Zoom. I believe Bergevin was overseas to the World Championships, and I talked to Brendan Shanahan. I said virtually, but it sounds like they had a real long chat. We know Brad Treliving was interviewed, but it sounds like Treliving and Bergevin probably had the most conversations. Not to say that there's others in the mix. On insider trading, they said that the Leafs are trying to keep things locked down and private, so things aren't getting out on who they're talking to. But those are the two main names right now out there as potential candidates that would be looking to fill this role. Of course, the Leafs don't want to wait too long. It's not too far here before the draft combine, followed by the draft free agency. A lot of business to be taken care of here in short order. So I would suspect that Brendan Shanahan and the Leafs are going to try to get this wrapped up and decision made sometime later this week. Let's go back to Calgary for a moment here. New GM Craig Conroy had a candid conversation interview with Frank Saravalli on his Daily Faceoff show, and a couple of things that he talked about. One of them was goaltending, which I found very interesting, and I think it's pretty clear and evident that the Calgary Flames have a crowded crease. They certainly have a goaltender in the young prospect Dustin Wolf, who has nothing left to accomplish at the American Hockey League level, and is certainly due for an NHL opportunity. That's fair to say. But he did talk about on the Daily Faceoff show, Conroy mentioned how Wolf has likely earned an opportunity here, and they got to do what's best for the organization. It didn't come out and say they were going to trade a goalie, but the way he made it sound, it's like that they kind of might be forced to, like they might need to. Obviously, you have a cap situation to deal with. Kind of really carry three goalies, at least not typically. Some teams do it short term because they're not sure who they want to move or how things are going to work out, or they want to protect themselves against injury, things like that, depending on what their cap and roster situation is like. But you had to guess in Calgary, if there's going to be a goalie traded, you would think it'd be backup goalie Danny Vladar, right? I mean, Jacob Markstrom's got a bigger contract, more trade protection, more complicated, less likely going to happen. Wolf could easily come in as being a cheaper version of the backup while he's on a ZLC here and give them good stability, hopefully between the pipes. We know Markstrom typically plays a lot. We'll see how things fare with the new head coach in Calgary. We don't know who that's going to be yet, of course, but what kind of philosophy they'll have and how much Markstrom plays. But at the end of the day here, Denny Vlad are likely going to get dealt this summer. Of course, there was some talk that we've seen from Boston media that the Bruins, of course, have a lot of uncertainty. They have a lot of UFAs there. Bergevin, Krejci, Foligno, a whole bunch of guys that are expiring contracts, especially a lot of the older veterans. And there's no real clear decision or word yet of who's coming back and who's not. They may have a cap issue. They may not. It just kind of depends. But they do have a bonus overage that's going to impact their cap next year as well. And besides not only the cap situation, but looking at how things went in the playoffs, there's a lot of Bruins media and fans that seem to think it's a possibility we might see a trade involving goaltender Linus Ullmark. Now, he's likely going to win the Vezina Trophy this year. We know he's in the conversation for it for sure, even if he doesn't win. But I think he's likely the favorite in my opinion. But at the end of the day here, I think they need to tread very carefully. They've been very blessed to have a real strong tandem with Ullmark and Swayman. We know they're always have a great relationship, great friends, which is also very important and, could impact the dynamic of the team. But it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that the Bruins do consider a goalie trade, depending on what they're presented with for offers. Of course, you just never know. And if they do trade Ullmark, it would make sense if they might want to consider talking to Calgary about bringing Vladar back. Of course, Vladar was in the Bruins organization. That's where he started and came from. Ended up getting traded to Calgary because obviously kind of got boxed into a situation because of the signing of Ullmark and the emergence of Swayman. And maybe they go with Swayman and Vladar. It would certainly make sense if they want to reconsider that. They could certainly have a cheaper tandem and certainly have good goaltending, between the two. It's something that I think they would consider, but I'm not convinced they're going to trade Ullmark, but I know some are convinced that they're at least thinking about it, but I'm not so sure we're going to see that. Another team, in my opinion, that makes a ton of sense for a guy like Vladar would be San Jose. Lots of uncertainty in who's going to be the starting goaltender there. Might be an opportunity for him to give the Sharks some good minutes in games and get a chance to start more. So we'll see. There's certainly lots of teams going to be looking to either change or shake up or, do something with their goaltending. So I don't think there'll be any shortage of opportunities, but those are a couple of teams that come to mind if things fall just the right way there. Now, another Flame to watch is going to be very interesting as well as Elias Lindholm. Now, based on Conroy's conversation, not only with Sarah Valley, but in the press conference when he was first announced as new GM of the Flames, he made it pretty clear that he wanted to have a conversation with Lindholm and some other guys, but made Lindholm kind of stick out as a priority to determine his future. He's entering the final year of his contract. He sure made it sound like he'd like to sign him and have him continue to be a member of the Calgary Flames. And I believe that at face value here to be true. However, a couple of things we have to keep in mind. We know at the end of the season, Lindholm appeared to be very unhappy with the Flames, showed a lot of, eagerness to maybe want to leave, along with a few others. Now, of course, Sutter's gone, Trey Living's gone. There have been a lot of changes. And it's fair to say that some of these guys very well might have a change of heart and feel differently now. I think a lot of guys certainly were not keen on playing for Sutter, and that is not an issue any longer. Fair to say that they might feel completely different now, but even if Lindholm is interested in staying and doesn't necessarily want out and feel the same as he did before, they still would have to negotiate a new contract. So we don't know how the Flames feel about him on a money perspective and what they'd be willing to offer. It's not a guarantee that he gets signed. If they get to the point that negotiations aren't going well and Conroy decides, you know what, I need to consider trading this guy, because they're going to have lots of conversations with their pending UFAs ahead of the draft, because that's a prime time to make trades if some of these guys are not going to be sticking around and signing new contracts. One team that continuously comes up around Lindholm's name is the Columbus Blue Jackets, and a couple of reasons why. For one, they're certainly not deep down the middle. They could certainly benefit from acquiring another top six centerman, so there's that. Secondly, it would kind of reacquaint him with his former line mate, Johnny Gaudreau, who he had his best ever season. When Lindholm was playing with Tkachuk and Gaudreau, they were the best line in hockey, and he had his best ever season. So you'd have 2/3 of that line reunited. You don't have Matthew Tkachuk, but you do have another really good potential sniper in the guy like Patrick Laine. You might have a guy in Laine who could be reignited here and get him back to being the 40-goal guy that he once was earlier in his career. That could be a dynamic threat as a line and be one of the best lines in hockey. At least no guarantee, but it has potential. When 2/3 of your line is already used to playing together and already have chemistry, it makes things easy to kind of plug and play and go on like that. Now, of course, what would the Jackets offer the Flames if they discuss this kind of trade? There's some that think that they might be willing to offer the number 3 overall pick in the 2023 draft. Now, will that be interesting to the Flames? A top 3 pick is not a common thing. They could get themselves a heck of a player. They could probably get either Adam Fantilli or Leo Carlsson, depending on who goes at number 2. They're going to get themselves a really good player. Fantilli and Carlsson could go to the NHL fairly quick, so they could be a player who has an impact either this season or next pretty quickly as well. So I don't know how the Flames would feel about that, but I would imagine that would be a deal that would be really, really hard to pass up. Otherwise, I would think that the Jackets would have to offer one of their top young players, like a Kent Johnson or maybe a Cole Sillinger. Johnson probably would be preferred, and I don't know that Columbus is probably not going to want to do that. So when you think about it, I mean, to me, it's probably a number 3 overall pick or bust. And I'm not sure Columbus wants to do that. I think Calgary would certainly be intrigued and entertained and to listen if that's on the table. I'd be curious to see how things could play out. But if the Flames get to a point that negotiations don't go well or Lindholm decides, you know what, I still would rather move on, I think Columbus makes a ton of sense for him to make a trade. And we'll see if that comes to be or not. When it comes to the Flyers, we talked about Carter Hart being potentially available based on an interview with Danny Briere, or he recently made comments saying that he would definitely have to entertain, all conversations and listen on anybody, and that includes Carter Hart. He said even though he felt that, they may not get the package that would be required to them to really think long and hard about it, he said there's still a good chance Carter Hart could be their goaltender of the future for now, especially. But if the right deal come along, they're open to anything and everything. But if it makes the team better, especially on a longer-term basis, another name to watch in that same kind of category is Ivan Provorov. And the recent article here on the Flyers from the Hockey News site and indicates that they feel Provorov is a prime candidate for trade, which I do concur with. The only problem is obviously we know that the last few years have not been the most kind to Provorov. Somebody's going to have to take Provorov with the expectation that they can kind of rehabilitate him and get him back to being the defenseman that he was showing in his first few years in the league before he kind of dropped off here a bit. But, we've seen other defensemen that were strong in Philly and had a lot of issues and then left and reignited their career. Prime example, Shane Gostisbehere. So to some degree, I think there's a connection to the Flyers on how this has gone, but at the same time, there's a lot of onus on the player here to do things a certain way and kind of work on their game as well. There's no doubt it's not all on coaching, it's not all on management. The player has responsibility here too, but Provorov, I think, would benefit from a fresh start. There was previous links to a team like the LA Kings last season. I'm not so sure they're really in a financial situation to consider that kind of move here today. It might be at a point too where the Flyers might have to offer an incentive to take on the contract. That's a possibility too. So hard to say what the Flyers do, but besides Carter Hart, I think Ivan Provorov is probably going to be one of the more interesting names to watch in that organization as we get to the summertime to see how Danny Briere kind of leaves his mark on this team and starts to reshape things. But moving on from that contract would be highly beneficial for them if they're able to do so. Now, as I mentioned as well, I want to touch on a crazy trade proposal I see floating around social media and involves the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Minnesota Wild. Now, of course, we're kind of getting to what we call the silly season here. This is the time of year where rumors are ramping. As teams get eliminated from the playoffs or eliminated, that didn't make the playoffs, always lots of talk and speculation about, well, what are they going to do this stuff? Every team makes at least some changes every year, that we know. And there's always talk, always speculation, always changes. And it's just how the sport works. However, we know that the Toronto Maple Leafs are expected to maybe, as I stress maybe, because we don't even have a new GM in Toronto yet, make a trade to shake up the top 4 forwards and to bring in something different and shake things up, to go with a different look, different DNA, etc., to have a better chance of being more successful in the playoffs. Well, the latest trade proposal, this comes on, I'll link the article down below, because I think it's pretty crazy. This is not going to happen, by the way. This is not a rumor from an informed insider. This is just one hockey writer's opinion and suggestion for trade. Sometimes I see these and I think they're great ideas and I talk about them. Sometimes I see them and I think they're terrible ideas, but I want to see what other people think. Am I the only one who thinks this is crazy and not going to happen? Let me know what you think. But the suggestion here is a trade of William Nylander from the Maple Leafs to the Minnesota Wild for centerman Joel Eriksson Ek. Now, it stresses a couple of things here. For starters, Eriksson Ek comes with a longer-term contract and a good value. The money's not real high. It's cheaper than what Nylander's making. It gives the Leafs another option for a number 2 center. They can move Tavares to the wing. Eriksson Ek's also a very solid 200-foot player. So, good at both ends of the ice. So, yes, he's a real good player. Adds a different dynamic for sure. Gives them a little bit of cap flexibility. Okay, William Nylander gets more offense into Minnesota. Gives the Wild a 40-goal scorer from this past season. Gives them a whole different look. But the problem here is Minnesota, I don't think it's ever going to, right now, at least for the next foreseeable future, they can't trade Joel Eriksson Ek. He's really their only... Ryan Hartman plays center, but to me, I think Hartman would be better as a winger. That's my opinion. But really, they don't have good depth at center. They really don't. Freddie Gaudreau has been a pleasant surprise. They've extended him, but he's not a high-end player. Sam Steele is still not consistent at all. So you've got Hartman and you've got Eriksson Ek. And like I said, in the right circumstances, I think Hartman would probably be a winger. And another thing is the Minnesota Wild have a terrible salary cap situation because of the buyout penalties that they're facing for the Parise and Suter buyouts. They really take a massive jump this year, and their cap situation is terrible. They cannot take on the contract without equal or more money going out. And that would not be the case in this scenario as well. It would not be a one-for-one trade if they did do it. And like I said, if they were going to, would the Wild be interested in maybe adding a William Nylander? Probably. I have no doubt a lot of teams would be interested in Nylander if the Leafs made it known they're willing to entertain this and wanted to kind of talk trade proposals around the league. But, I'm not convinced that this is no offense to Eriksson Ek, I just don't think that that's what they want back. And secondly, Minnesota can't do the deal. So to me, I can see this proposal floating around. I've seen a few people talking about it. This article getting shared. And you see this, this is not an article. This is not information from an NHL insider. This thing said this is not a hockey writer's opinion. But to me, it's completely ridiculous. It's not going to happen. I think the Leafs might, and I stress might, trade Nylander or Marner. That would not be what the deal would look like. They would want another higher level superstar coming back, and it would not necessarily have to be a centerman either. I think they very well easily could get a winger back, just a different type of winger. If they could get a centerman, I think they're probably open to it. Like I said, Tavares can move to the wing. He is getting a little bit older. His foot speed's not the best. I do understand the desire to maybe work him into being a left winger for the last couple of years of his, his contract. But, at the same time, they have options. They have flexibility there. But I just don't see that trade happening. I thought it was pretty crazy. And the article stresses how Minnesota could kind of afford to move Eriksson Ek because of their depth at center, which I thought was absurd because, if anything, to me, it's not a strong point for the franchise. You take him out of the mix, their center depth is not great at all. And if they're going to try to contend for playoffs and, still be in the mix here, they just can't do that. Nylander is a nice addition, don't get me wrong, but you need that depth down the middle, which is more important than depth on the wing, and they just wouldn't have it. So I just don't see that trade ever taking place. Though I like, is William Nylander a higher point producer, a bigger goal scorer than Eriksson Ek? Sure. Like I said, I don't see from a cap perspective, and I just don't know that the Leafs would do that for starters. I don't like the trade really for either side. I just don't see the fit. But let me know what you think, and we'll talk about it further down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.